So, Dana, I'm a little bit confused with all this new stuff going on. How am I supposed to show property, make sure my broker's getting paid when I don't see any information in the MLS service about seller side compensation to my broker and not be accused of steering? How does all of this work now? Hi, everybody. Dana Sparks, broker of Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors and the director of the Real Estate Academy of America. And today's video is going to address that topic, buyer's agents, showing property without necessarily knowing in advance any compensation coming to your broker from the seller side and not steer or be accused of steering. Stay tuned to the end, and I'm going to share with you a form that we use at Maximum One Companies to protect yourself and protect your brokers from any accusations of steering. If you are a Maximum One agent, you are more than welcome, of course, to use the form. If you are watching this and not a Maximum One agent, please, with anything you learn from any video or any class, make sure you run that by your own broker and get your own broker's permission. So let's dive in. So the issue is you cannot steer. What is steering? Basically, steering is you cannot show a property or not show a property or steer a buyer. I'm talking about buyer's agents right now. Show a buyer a property or not show a buyer property based on the amount of commission or compensation that you are going to receive. Guess what, agents? That has never been allowed. That is not new with the NAR settlement terms. That has never been allowed. A buyer hires you to help them with their real estate needs, find them a house that they are looking for based on what they told you, what they're qualified for, so forth and so on. So, how does all of this work now? Well, there is no issue of you as the buyer's broker. And again, please, I'll link the playlist below. We've talked about this in many previous videos. The public pays your broker and your broker pays you. So it's really the brokers that get paid and you get paid from your broker. But I'm going to, moving forward, talk about it using the term agent. But you guys know how it works. Again, I'll link those playlists below. Check out everything on my YouTube channel. So basically, you are going to get paid when a buyer hires you for your professional services of working with them as a buyer. You sign an agreement with them. You've always signed an agreement with them. If you're working with them as a client, you have always in Georgia been required to sign a buyer brokerage agreement. That agreement in Georgia creates that client relationship. And at Maximum One, we have always required as a policy that your buyer customers sign a customer acknowledgement. It's not required by law, but you want to make sure that they understand the nature of their relationship with the broker. Now, with the terms of the NAR settlement, you are required to sign either the buyer is required to sign either a buyer brokerage agreement or a customer acknowledgement prior to showing the first house. So the only change regarding that is the timing. Two things: the timing of when a buyer signs an agreement, and that agreement must disclose compensation. And now buyers are required to sign an agreement even if they choose to be a customer of your broker. In the agreement that the buyer signs with you when they hire you to help them go about buying a house, they agree to compensation. They agree that they are hiring you for a certain amount of money. So guess what? You are getting paid regardless when they buy a house. The buyer has obligated themselves to pay your broker for the professional services they are hiring you for. So there's not a question of you not getting paid. You're getting paid by the buyer, if nothing else. So that backs into conversations you have to have with your buyer, qualifications with your buyer, making sure your lenders take that into account when qualifying your buyer. Whole nother topic. But regardless, you're getting paid when a buyer hires you. They're hiring you for your professional services. So now what happens? Well, we had been able, so we've worked with a buyer. They say they're going to pay us X amount of dollars, X amount % of the sale price for our professional services of helping them buy and close on a house. Now, we see what they're qualified for, what they're looking for, area, all that kind of stuff. You find houses to show your buyer. Prior to the NAR-Member MLS services taking any co-op fees out of that, you as the buyer's agent, you could readily see before you ever showed a house how much compensation the seller side, generally speaking, it was coming from the seller's broker, but how much compensation the seller side was compensating the buyer side for if the buyer bought that house. So you could see that in advance. Now the change with the NAR settlement is you cannot readily see that information in advance on an NAR-Member MLS service. However, sellers are still paying compensation to buyers, brokers, and sellers, agents are still co-oping part of their fee, sharing part of their fee with a buyer's broker, buyer's agent in a co-op transaction, co-op arrangement, fee arrangement. The only difference is now you buyer's agents, you have to do a little bit more legwork up front to find out how much compensation is coming to the buyer side from the seller side, because it's not readily available in an NAR-Member MLS. In an independent MLS, it might be it might be there, might not be there. So there has to be more communication between the buyer's agents and the seller's agents. And there's all sorts of Georgia Association Realtors paperwork to get this confirmed. But nevertheless, you get this information prior to showing a house, and you share that information with your buyer. And depending on what your buyer chooses to do, it is your buyer's decision to see or not see a house. It is not your decision to not show a house. So let me give you an example, and then I'm going to back into the paperwork and show you guys what I'm talking about. So here's the example. The example is you work with a buyer hires you for your professional services to help them buy a house. You sign an agreement with a buyer. They agree to pay you, your broker, at closing X% of the sale price for the services they're hiring you to do. Great. You find out what they're looking for: bedrooms, bathrooms, price range, area, school district, all that information. You find a whole bunch of houses to show them. Now, you go to your buyer, here are the houses to show them. You say, okay, buyer, house number 1, you have agreed at closing to pay my broker X% compensation. And I have found out in writing from the seller's agent that the seller side is paying at closing my broker that same X% compensation. Do you want to see this house? And in the buyer brokerage agreement, you have agreed, number 1, that I can get paid from the seller side, and number 2, that whatever I get paid from the seller side will be reduced from your financial obligation to me at closing. So it's the same. So what you obligated yourself to pay at closing is the amount I'm getting paid, the seller side will pay at closing. Your amount minus their amount equals $0 additional that you will owe my broker at closing. Do you want to see this house? Yes or no? Buyer is most likely going to say yes. Go show that house. Okay, house number 2. Okay, buyer, at closing, you have agreed to pay my broker X% of the sale price. You have still agreed that I can get compensated, my broker can get compensated from the seller's side, and whatever compensation I get from them is subtracted from your financial obligation at closing. So that's the scenario in that's the agreement I signed with the buyer. So, okay, buyer, I'm going to show you that in a second. So, okay, buyer, house number 2. You've agreed to pay me X% of the sale price at closing. House number 2. Either I cannot get any information from their side. I have not been able to confirm if the seller side, either in a co-op arrangement from the seller's broker or directly from the seller themselves, if they are going to compensate my broker at closing. So if we see this house and you decide to buy it, there are all sorts of ways we can ask the seller to compensate, to pay that compensation, whole other video. But right now, before we see this house, I do not have that information. So if you buy this house, if we go see this house and you buy this house, potentially at closing, you are going on top of the other fees you're going to have to pay, your down payment, closing costs, moving costs, all of that information, inspections, appraisal fees, all of that. You have also obligated yourself to pay my broker X% of the sale price at closing. Buyer, I will be more than happy to show you this house. It meets all of your what you said you're looking for. Buyer, based on that, do you want to see this house? Yes or no? So this is not, and then it's up to the buyer to make the decision whether or not they want to see this house. You're willing to show it. Guess what? You're still getting paid. You're going to either get paid from the buyer directly, you're going to get paid from the seller directly, or you're going to get paid from the seller's broker in a co-op deal, or you're going to get paid in some combination thereof. So buyers agents, buyers brokers, it's not a question of you steering to show a house or not show a house based on how much you're going to get paid. You've already confirmed with the buyer how much you're going to get paid for your job. The question is, who is paying, which party or what combination is paying that fee? And the decision of whether or not to see a house, it's not you choosing to not show it, it's the buyer choosing to see it or not see it based on a number of factors. It could be compensation. It could be the buyer has decided they don't like that area. They don't like that neighborhood. It's too far of a commute from work. It's not in the right school district. They found out that they're going to widen the road. The zoning is changing. It could be any number of reasons that a buyer chooses to not see a house rather than you deciding not to show a house because of something that will impact you professionally. So that's how that works. Now, let me show you the paperwork that backs up what the buyer has, their financial obligation to you. And stay tuned. I'm going to share with you this form that I think is really going to be protective of agents and brokers. And again, we are using it at Maximum One. Please share with your broker if you're going to get your broker to do that. And if you have questions about Maximum One, contact me. Let me share my screen and let me briefly show you these forms that I am talking about. So the first form to show you is and I have this link below in other videos as well. This is how to complete the buyer compensation paragraph in the Georgia Association of Realtors contract packages. This is the same in the buyer brokerage agreements and in the customer acknowledgement. And I'm not going to go through a full explanation, but this paragraph here is the amount of compensation the buyer obligates themselves to pay your broker at closing for the services that they are hiring you to do, namely, help them buy a house. This second section states that the buyer does approve or not approve of you receiving compensation from the seller side. Doesn't matter how you're getting paid from the seller side, either the seller directly or from their broker in a co-op deal. Regardless, they approve or don't approve. And additionally, they say this is the maximum amount you can get from the seller side. And then this next section, a buyer would, if this box is marked, the buyer would say, whatever you get from the seller side, you subtract it from my obligation, and that's how much the buyer will owe your broker at closing. So if you mark this box, it'll say the buyer would owe the amount in B minus whatever amount you're getting from the seller side. The amount you're getting from the seller side has nothing to do with this. This is the maximum amount, but whatever a buyer agrees to in the buyer compensation agreement, your seller isn't signing this. So we have no idea what a seller in any particular house has agreed to pay or if they have agreed to pay. But this box right here says the buyer would owe the amount in B minus any amount paid from the seller side, not to exceed the amount in C. So if the amount they obligate themselves to pay, if this percent is the same percent that you're getting from the seller side, this percent minus what you're getting from the seller side would equal 0. That's how much they would pay. Now, here's the form that protects you from any allegations of steering. This is the maximum one form that states we're calling it buyer property tour options. At Maximum One Greater Atlanta, we value buyers who've chosen to work with our brokerage as clients and customers. Our agents may assist in locating, showing, discussing, and consulting with buyers regarding specific properties. At Maximum One, we value our buyers and their option to choose the properties they wish to tour. Accordingly, please affirm your decision to tour or not tour the following properties. So you buyer's agent, whatever properties the buyer that you have for the buyers to see, you're going to list out the property address. There is a yes or no box. For any property, especially any property the buyer chooses to not see, for any reason. It doesn't have to be any compensation coming from the seller side. Again, it could be any number of reasons, but it is a list of properties at the present time that meet the criteria your buyer states that they are looking for. Your buyer chooses to not see that property for whatever reason. You don't state the reason doesn't matter. You're just stating this is the property the buyer chooses especially to not, if they choose to not see it, you mark that. And then at the bottom, it says all parties agree to indemnify and hold agent and broker agent harmless from and against all claims, injuries, suits, and damages arising out of their decision with respect to the above choices. And then your buyer, whether that be a client or a customer, they sign it and date it. You list the name of the brokerage and you sign it and date it. So again, this will confirm that you are ready to show that property because you have the property identified to show the buyer. The property meets what they've said, the criteria the buyer has said at this point in time they are looking for. And it is the buyer's decision to see or not see that property, and they sign it. So that is the form that will confirm, hopefully protect, but that will confirm that it is not a question of you choosing to not show your buyer. It is an issue of your buyer choosing to not see a property. A buyer choosing to not see a property is not steering. That is a buyer's choice. Our buyers we've always had lists of properties to show them. And for whatever reason, buyers have decided, no, I don't want to see that one, or I do want to see this one. A buyer does not see every property that a buyer's agent may find to show the buyer. So hopefully this explains things a little bit, how you as a buyer's agent, or it gives you some procedures, how you as a buyer's agent can not steer, always been illegal, and not be accused of steering, hopefully, or protect yourself from any potential allegations of steering based on any number of factors. You want to avoid any fair housing issues, as well as compensation issues coming from the seller side. So I welcome your thoughts below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Dana Sparks, broker of Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors, satisfying your needs with service, innovation, and education. Bye. If you like that video, check out the one here. If you like the content on this entire channel, please click here to subscribe. I try to take even the most complicated of real estate situations and make them crystal clear. See what I did there? Real estate made crystal clear. Thank you guys so much for watching.